The Spiritual Combat and a Treatise on Peace of Soul by Don Lorenzo Scupoli. Chapter 8. An obstacle to forming a correct judgment, an aid to the formation of a correct judgment. Any difficulty in forming a correct judgment of the things we have just mentioned in the preceding chapters, and of many others also, arises from a superficial notion of love and hatred, from a hasty conception we might form of them at first glance. Since our reason is influenced by blind passion, everything appears in a far different light from that in which it should be considered. Whoever, therefore, desires to entrench himself against such a dangerous and common illusion must carefully preserve his heart free from all inordinate affection. When an object presents itself, let the understanding weigh its merits with mature deliberation before the will is permitted to embrace it if agreeable, or reject it if otherwise. As long as the understanding remains unbiased by the passions, it will easily distinguish between truth and falsehood, between real evil masquerading as good, and real good under the false appearance of evil. However, as good as the will is moved either to love or hatred by the object, the understanding cannot form a true estimate of it, because the affection disguises it and imprints an incorrect idea. When this is again presented to the will, which already is prepossessed, it redoubles its love or hatred, pushes beyond all limits, and is utterly deaf to the voice of reason. Consequently, in this distorted confusion, the understanding plunges deeper and deeper into error and represents the object to the will in a vivid color of good and evil. Consequently, whenever the rule laid down before, which is of the greatest importance on this occasion, is neglected, the two noblest faculties of the soul are bewildered in a network of error, darkness, and confusion. Happy are those who strip themselves of all attachment to creatures and then endeavor to discover the true nature of things before they permit their affections to be attached. Who formulate their judgments by the principles of reason, and particularly by the supernatural guides which the Holy Ghost willingly communicates, either immediately from himself or through those whom he has appointed as our directors. But remember, this advice very frequently must be followed more precisely in those things which are good in themselves than in those which are not completely good, because there is greater danger of deception. They usually engender a misconceived enthusiasm. Do nothing rashly, therefore, since a single unobserved factor of time or place may ruin everything. A great fault may be committed in the way a thing is done, as is true of many who have fashioned their own destruction in the practice of the holiest exercises. Chapter 9. Curiosity, another method to prevent deception of the understanding. Curiosity is another vice from which the mind must be free. If we indulge in vain, frivolous, or sinful dreams, our minds will become incapable of choosing the proper mortification of our disorderly affections. All earthly things, except those absolutely necessary, must die through our complete disregard for them. All earthly things, except for that which is absolutely necessary, must die through our complete disregard for them, even though they are not wrong in themselves. We must control our minds and not permit them to wander aimlessly about. Our minds must become insensible to the mundane projects, to gossip, and to feverish search for news. Our indifference to the affairs of this world must give them a dreamlike quality. The same holds true for heavenly things. We must be discreet and humble. Our greatest ambition must be to see the crucified Christ always before us, his life and death, what efforts he demands of us. Seek nothing beyond this. It will please the Divine Master. His real friends ask only for those things that will enable them to fulfill his commissions. Any other desire, any other quest is but self-love, spiritual pride, and encirclement by the devil. Such a disciplined conduct is well fortified against the assaults of the devil. When this skilled opponent sees the fervor of persons beginning spiritual exercises and the fixed resolution of their wills, he insinuates his subtleties into their understanding. A breakthrough here permits him to push his way to the will. He is then the master of both these faculties. As a feint, he inflates their imagination in moments of prayer, suggesting elevated sentiments. He works particularly on those who are curious and discerning by nature, who are subject to self-conceit and are fond of their own schemes. His aim, of course, is to amuse them with idle dreams and the sensible pleasure they afford, so that, drugged with a false sense of appreciation of God, they may forget to cleanse their hearts, to examine themselves, and to practice mortification. In this way they become inflated with pride, and they idolize their own understanding. Having become accustomed to consult no one but themselves, they finally are persuaded that they no longer need the advice or assistance of others. It is a deadly and almost incurable disease. It is much more difficult to remedy pride of the understanding than that of the heart. As soon as pride of the heart is discovered by the intelligence, it can be removed by a voluntary submission to proper authorities. But if a person imagines and persists in maintaining that he is wiser than his superiors, how will his deception be shattered? How will he discover his error? To whose judgment will he submit so long as he considers himself wiser than the rest of the world? If the understanding, the searchlight of the soul, which alone can discover and rectify the vanity of the heart, is itself blinded and swollen with pride, who is able to cure it? If the light changes to darkness, if the leader is treacherous, what will happen to the rest? Be on guard, therefore, against such a fatal attack. Never let it overwhelm your minds. We must train ourselves to conform to the judgments of others. Without carrying our notions of spirituality too high, let us become enamored with the folly and simplicity recommended so highly by the Apostle. Then shall we surpass Solomon himself in wisdom. And that concludes chapter 9. I will start 10 on a different frame. See you on the next one.